I know I'm not really a game review channel, but let's see how this goes. Hey everyone, this is Gainer of All, and I'm here to talk to you a bit about Knights of Pen and Paper 2. Mostly due to a surge all over YouTube, with multiple channels doing promotional commercials for the game, but also because I've been getting into the game myself in recent times and figured, I got a channel too. I can give my opinion on this game also, and hopefully work to give you guys my true, honest opinion about this game, as I'm not associated with Paradox Interactive. As mentioned, this is not a paid promotion, but instead my opinions on the game that I think many of these promos gloss over, because Paradox does not want you to know about some of the shady stuff that happens behind your back. Also, this is going to cover the regular game that you can buy either on Steam, Nintendo eShop, PlayStation Network, etc. But I will make mention of the free version that is available on Steam and other mobile devices. While I do plan to talk about the original game, Knights of Pen and Paper, this will likely be on its own video, so this is going to be a bit out of order. So if you guys like what you guys see here, stay tuned for a video on the future about the original Knights of Pen and Paper. Let's get some rather easy questions out of the way quickly. Is Knights of Pen and Paper 2 worth playing? Yes, I do believe it is. It's got a charm for tabletop RPGs that aren't easily accessible on consoles, and it has an interface that looks pretty, and it's pretty fun. Is it overall a good game? Also yes. There are many aspects of the game that I can respect and enjoy going forward. I'll go over those in a bit. Does any of this excuse the numerous flaws in game mechanics built against the player that ultimately lead players down the path of infinite grinding and total burnout? Not even close. I really want to start off with the aspects of the game that I really enjoyed, as the game itself has some merit that make for an enjoyable time. If the previous statement didn't already give you a good idea of my total thoughts on this game, be prepared. This praise is going to be followed by a complete tearing into this game. So firstly, I want to say that I enjoyed the new art style of the game for the most part. Many monsters really pop out with a jump to 32-bit graphics, with varied attacks and animations that honestly look pretty good when compared to the original. Though this comes to a cost of most NPCs kind of looking a little samey and having comically large heads with very small faces, making things look awkward at best, or with their faces look like they're melting at worst. Secondly, I like how it seems they took a lot of extra time when it came to developing the classes. Each skill they can learn has some weight, and it's important to learn the best skills for the job. Combined with your character's race or who they are in the real world, make for some interesting combinations that even at higher levels requires constant thought on behalf of the player, making combat more interesting than I had in the original game. Lastly, I actually enjoyed the story this time around. The tutorial jumps you straight in and teaches you all the new mechanics, but it's far from mandatory. I loved the interactions between the characters and the DM, and it felt really organic and real. With all this praise, you'd be hard pressed to think that there's anything wrong with this game. That couldn't be farther from the truth. So where does the game fall flat? Well, let me explain. As I mentioned before, the combat has been refined quite a bit, with the player skills getting a lot of a rework. One of the biggest changes came down to how criticals were handled. Before, it was just some extra damage based on your character's stats. Criticals were never the main focus in combat. Instead, it happened to be little accidents that happened that made combat a bit more interesting for both sides. But now criticals are the cornerstone of combat, as it is the way of inflicting status ailments like stun, bleeding, burning, poison, and confusion. With this focus on criticals, enemies now have a higher critical chance range. Ranges spanning anywhere above 20% most of the time, even at the early levels, which can only increase the farther you go. And if that doesn't sound like a lot, I really want you to imagine fighting anywhere between 5 to 7 enemies at a time, as you'll probably want to benefit the most from your combat encounters. So with these ranges, it'll be difficult not to encounter a critical hit from your enemies once or twice each round. And this means dealing with a heavy increase in damage, as well as dealing with the nasty side effects that come with it as well, which can stack multiple times. Other changes to combat involve the inclusion of random map events, a mechanic that changes combat in some form depending on the area that you're in when combat begins. Some events are minor and don't disrupt your combat that much, like in the starting town of Spawn Point Village, where the event is to get rid of any first edition characters. Considering first edition characters don't appear in Spawn Point Village as mobs that you can fight after the tutorial, this is honestly the only place that doesn't really have these ghastly intrusions. Other map events cause enemies to spawn in mid-combat, disrupting attack patterns. Some cause enemies to flee, losing your experience points or gold that you have gained. Certain ones destroy game balance and go against the rules that the game lays out on the table to be lols so random, like an event that makes all enemies ignore threat. The aggro of this game, meaning that your squishy damage dealers are likely to die in these encounters. Or in the worst cases, to me, involving a map event that makes all your players deal 50% less damage to all enemies, while your opponents get to deal 50% more damage to all your players. And this appears in a super early dungeon in the game, a place where the recommended level is supposed to be 13. But even with my party of level 20s, I still found myself getting destroyed in these encounters. And unfortunately, the only good option to solve this is to grind. Now, in this version of Knights and Pen and Paper 2, grinding can be made a bit easier by using the Farm Village, a place close to Spawn Point Village where you can fight scarecrows that level up with your party and give good amounts of experience and gold. However, thanks to the botched combat, I found the scarecrows to have some of the highest critical chance out of all enemies, which meant that fighting them wasn't even really worth it, because I would just die trying to grind. Either the constant bleeding or getting attacked in my sleep, huge power gains when the enemy would gain levels, and so on. But grinding is the only way to get through the toughest parts of this game, either for experience or gold or to buy new equipment and healing items. Now, I know I said that I wouldn't be mentioning the original too often in this video, as I want to make something special just for it, but it can be helped here. One thing it did really well is how it handled damage. Just about every attack had some sort of element tied to it, whether it was physical, radiant, ice, fire, nature, etc. And various enemies would have resistances to certain attacks and also be weak to certain attacks, based on those elements. Knights 2 just straight up yeets most of this out the window in favor of a flat damage reduction score that increases with the enemy level to an absurd degree. This can still be used by the player, which is fine, but every enemy has this stat somewhere on their sheets, meaning no matter what you fight, you'll never be able to deal the maximum amount of damage to anything, and at higher levels, enemies take ages to fight, even when you're fighting the same level and you're carrying the best gear that you can for your level. Consider that as you progress, battles take longer and longer and longer, to the point that some encounters take up to 10 minutes fighting normal enemies. Trying your best not to die from the massive amount of criticals you take, trying to conserve energy so you don't spend it all, dealing with skills that won't deal damage because the enemies keep rolling really high for some reason. I'm looking at you specifically, cleric. Does any of this even sound fun? After combat, you're supposed to feel satisfied or even powerful for defeating a hard boss, but Knights 2 never made me feel this way after the first hour of playing. Fighting was stressful consistently, and considering it was a huge part of the game, it bogs down the experience. I came out of battles relieved to have no deaths if I was even that lucky, and that feeling never went away. And I guess this is the best time to talk about whatever even is the free version of this game. As said earlier, it's made to be the same game, but free on Steam and mobile devices, like Android and iOS. Everything I mentioned before has been exacerbated to the extreme for this version of the game. While the numbers for stats, health, energy, and the like are pretty low for the most part in the normal game, keeping true to tabletop roots, the free version explodes the numbers in super high levels, generally taking everything in the normal game and just times everything by 10. That's a good way to start. But gold somehow remains to be about the same, so be ready to grind a ton for that short sword that only costs 100 gold in the base game, and now costs 1000 gold in the free version. Oh, but wait, because this is a free game, it has to have microtransactions for some reason. With the low price of your wallet, you can get your hands on diamonds, this game's premium currency that lets you get more gold or resurrect your whole party when you wipe over and over, or get your hands on overpowered gear, or just buy DLC story bits, which used to be able to be bought for in-game gold before. Does this sound money hungry yet? Because it wasn't always like this. There wasn't always a free version to play, even on mobile phones. But Paradox Interactive decided to change everything. So much so as to make the original paid version of the game straight up become the free version. At least on Steam you can still buy the original sequel, but mobile devices can only play this version of the game now. And it gets even worse when players who had been supporting Paradox Interactive before all this even happened, the ones who paid for the game and spent tons of hours unlocking everything, the real supporters that you should have been taking care of, you just straight up ignored and decided to make this change. They deleted everything those players had done and replaced it with just buy it all back with diamonds. That's one of the scummiest, shadiest business practices I'd ever seen before up at that point. So many players who looked past the flaws, who stood by your game, who told everyone that it was worth their time, can't even look back at the game anymore because they remember having wasted so much time and money into that game and have nothing to show for it. Hopefully this wasn't a video that upset anyone. My point here wasn't to say that the company is bad and anyone who plays these games or wants to play these games should feel bad. But to give you an idea, I wrote most of the script down over 1.5 years ago and rewrote all of this down with a clearer head than before. A ton of feelings got brought back up while I was writing this, and it felt surreal experiencing all of it again. If you don't want to take my word for it, I really want you to watch a video review of some sort from any other popular D&D related channels on YouTube, like Dingo Doodles, XP to Level 3, Joe Cat, and so on. And just kind of watch it how many of their gameplay clips involve a party member being dead, or the people complaining about needing money a lot of the time, as those were paid promotions for the free mobile version of the game that had all of these problems, but in full frontal force, if you know what I mean. I think I need a bit to get this game out of my mouth, so if you don't mind, I'm probably going to go play some of the original game while I work on the script for the next video. Thanks for watching, everyone.